Hello, welcome to this very special edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian, Pace reporting live here at BB King's here in New York City. When you think of guitarist Larry Carlton, you think of the many, many important rock, soul, and jazz recordings that he contributed to from the late 1960s up into the mid-1980s. In addition to that, he's been nominated 19 times for the Grammy and won 4 of them, and he's collaborated with some of the most important musical icons of their day, including Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, Steely Dan, Donald Fagan, Andy Williams, The Fifth Dimension, Bobby Blue Bland. The list is very, very, very endless. Tonight I sat down with Mr. Carlton and we talked about his latest CD, a collaboration with guitarist Robben Ford. Also, we talked about him starting his label 332 Records. We also talked about why blues music as a whole has not been really commercialized and in the public psyche, as well as talking about some of the major influences on him as a guitarist as well as a musician. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the sounds of Mr. Larry Carlton and his quartet live here at BB King's here in New York City. Larry, congratulations, one, on your Grammy-nominated album this year, as well as the brand new Unplugged record with a good friend of yours, Robben Ford.
Thank you.
This has been pretty much the grind of the business for 40-something years. Tell me how you keep doing it.
I stay passionate about the music. I fell in love with the guitar when I was 6 years old, and that same passion is with me today. Every time I pick up the guitar, it becomes important to me.
You know, Robben Ford and you guys just sat down and just played, and sometimes when you play without a band or a rhythm section, it gets very, very personal and intimate, and you guys really went home on American roots music on this project.
Yeah, well, you know, Robben's one of my favorite players, and he's a great, great musician. So when we sit down to play, there's no ego. We just appreciate each other's talent so much. I want to hear Robben play. I will gladly play rhythm and let him stretch, you know, and I think he feels the same way.
You know, blues has been another part of your passion throughout your career, and one of the things I've noticed about you and some other guitarists, especially Robben, that the American public really isn't in tune with blues anymore. What's the problem with that?
Well, I think it's social, you know. They can't relate, I think, the younger audiences can't relate to the topic. That's old black music from the South is where it came from, and gospel music from the South. And kids even in their 20s and 30s now, they don't relate to that time, that past time. So I think it's topical. They hear it and they go, well, I don't care about that. They're just a different generation.
What do you think about the younger generation, like the Shamika Copelands and the Gary Clark Jr.'s now, that really are taking the element of rock and blues and bringing it to a contemporary and a younger audience?
Yeah, well, I'm aware of Gary, so I can speak about him. I'm glad he's doing his thing, and I'm glad he's getting the attention that he's getting. You know, he was in the movie, and he's playing great gigs, and yeah, I'm glad that he's bringing that to a younger audience. I'm good friends with Keb Mo, and Keb's doing the same thing, obviously, for a number of years now. Soulful, down home, no frills, storytelling. And in fact, next week, Keb has 3 solo gigs that he's doing, and I'm going to go out with him and be his unannounced special guest.
Oh, wow. Now, part of the blues stems, like you said, from the church as well as the fields. And 2 of the most important parts of blues music stem from either the harp, which is the harmonica, as well as the guitar. Tell me some of the most important blues influences in your life and inspired you to play the blues.
Yeah, when I was 16 years old, my grandmother gave me a record by B.B. King. And I put it on, and the band, it was a big band. The band was swinging so hard, and B could just go boom, but that band was just, it had such an attitude. I had to get a piece of that. Prior to that, I was playing pop music and studying jazz. So I got touched.
You know, B.B. King, there's a great lineage of great blues guitarists. Albert King, Buddy Guy, Son House, Robert Johnson. What is it about blues guitar that's so different than playing jazz guitar?
Expression. In the blues, there's bending of strings and vibrato on strings. And in bebop especially, jazz guitar, the strings are very stiff and there's not as much expression on them. It's more for playing lines rather than one note meaningfully. And both obviously are very ballad, but the blues thing. The guitar is the perfect blues instrument. It sings, you can play rhythm, you can play soft, you can play loud. It's got a lot to say.
I want to touch on something too that you just added about the bending of strings. When you were relatively young, in your teens and early 20s, you developed a very unique concept of the bending of the strings. But I understand that you learned it through listening to country music.
Yeah, country music in the late 50s, when I would be 10 years old or so, was very popular on television in Southern California. So I was hearing steel guitar players every Saturday night on TV, plus hearing Joe Maphis and Jimmy Bryant, Speedy West on steel. So those were going in while I was taking guitar lessons, and part of it stuck. You know, I know what that sound is. So I've had, in fact, Joe Sample told me one time, he said, Larry, you sound kind of country this year. It was coming back. It was surfacing, you know.
So that's the reason why you can kind of go, you can skip genres when you play. There's 1 minute you can play, like I just heard when you were doing sound check, there's a very bluesy element and country element to what you're doing.
Yes, there is. Just part of who I am.
talk about the origins, the beginnings of Larry Carlton in California. I understand that you, besides listening to B.B. King, you really got hip to a man by the name of John Coltrane.
I did. Again, I was touched. Even at 14 years old, I bought the Ballads album by Train. And I could just listen to it over and over again. And on that album, John Coltrane only plays the melody. He doesn't stretch, he doesn't improvise, but he plays the melody with so much heart that I would get chills. And I know that's had a huge influence on my playing, because I'm very satisfied just playing the melody if I can make it feel good and sound good. That's from Train.
I mean, you nailed something. My next question. I mean, I noticed that a lot of your solos are very melodic, and that's missing today in a lot of instrumental, especially jazz music. Why is that now? Why do you think that the melody is definitely forgotten when it comes to not just improvisation, but just music in general?
Yeah, boy, it's a tough question. I can only tell you that when I do clinics and seminars around the world, it's mostly guitar players there. And I remind them, it's easy to play stuff on the guitar. Stuff. Don't play like a guitar player. Play like a musician, even though you're holding a guitar, which means play melodic. But yeah, the guys, it's so easy to do all this stuff on the guitar. It doesn't sound good. It's just busy stuff.
How did you get started off playing guitar? Who were some of your most important teachers or influences when you started playing guitar?
Well, yeah, I was brought up in Torrance, California, and there was a local teacher there that we found. His name was Slim Edwards. Had a small little shop about the size of this room, and I took lessons once a week from him for 8 years. And he wasn't a jazz player, and he wasn't a blues player, and he didn't play with a guitar pick. He played with his fingers. He was originally from Chicago. But he taught me to read music, and he recognized my enthusiasm as a young kid. So in my 30-minute lesson, the first 5 or 6 minutes, we would just jam. He'd let me get that out, see. Then he'd say, all right, now it's time to go to work on the thing. But every week I got to jam with my teacher, a boogie-woogie, anything that I was current. So I think that was one gift that Mr. Edwards really gave me, was that time to let me be happy and then go to work.
You brought up something about technique in guitars. There are people that play with the pick, and there are lots that play with their fingers. And Wes Montgomery was one of those who was a very important influence on your life. Tell me about Wes Montgomery as far as entering your psyche and where he is right now in your playing style 50 years later.
Yeah, you know, Wes with the octave thing. That's his identity, his sound, playing octaves on the guitar with his thumb. A guitar player, anytime over the last 50 years and in another 50 years, if they ever play octaves, they're playing Wes. He gets credit for that sound. So, you know, when he was on A&M Records and started having hit singles, you know, A Day in the Life and those pop songs, well, I played all those tunes in clubs when I was 16 and 17 years old. So I was like a junior Wes when I was 16 because I was playing his stuff and got that technique down really good. So it's there. It's just always there. I can go there. The first tune I'll play tonight with just the trio is a Wes. Go for it. Yeah.
part of your life from the 70s up until probably the mid-90s, you were one of the most important session musicians in Los Angeles. And you got to cut your teeth on all genres of music: pop, jazz, soul, blues. What was it about being a session musician, especially in the 70s, that helped you get your name out there, but helped develop your style?
Yeah, I started doing sessions in late 1969, so I would have been 21 years old. That's when I got busy. I got to sit next to some of the world's greatest musicians 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That raises your game. You're just hearing subtleties that the older cats are doing, not just on guitar, but the way they played the drums and the way they feel the record. All that was a learning process for me. And I know that part of the reason I got so busy doing sessions was I was, if you will, a leader of a new generation of studio player. I came from pop. I love jazz. I love country music. And I was versatile in all of those places, but the thing that separated me from the 60s, I could read music. So the producers could call Larry Carlton. If it was charts, if it was Quincy Jones, there's a chart, I could read it. If they needed just background fills that sounded like George Harrison, or I could do all of that. My predecessors from the pop world in the studios couldn't read music, so they were limited, and I was one of the first young guys who could bring all that to the table.
I mean, because Larry, you, in the 70s, it was you, Lee Ritenour, Phil Upchurch. I'm leaving out one more important one, but you guys pretty much were the integral part of popular music from 69 to like 85.
Yeah, we were there at the right time, and we could bring what was needed for the music at that. And we helped change pop music in the 70s, not trying to, but just the stuff we brought, the producers started going, hey, let's use some of that, and it made them think differently. Yeah, and the other person that we should mention is Louis Shelton.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah, his resume is above and beyond. I mean, the tastiest guitar player I've ever heard.
You know, rock and roll really kind of changed in the 70s also. It went from the preppy British rock to the loud glam rock, and the guitarists became stars within their own right in the 70s. What did you think about groups like, and musicians like Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck when they came along? Because you guys were coming around the same time also.
Yeah, I was a little later than that. I remember in the 67, 68, I think I heard that Blues Breakers album by John Mayall with Clapton on it. And it was a new thing. All of a sudden, here's a guitar player with a Les Paul playing through a Marshall, but trying to play blues, but in an English. I mean, it was so special. And then the solos that Eric did with Cream. I mean, that's as tasty guitar playing as you want in rock music back then. And Jimmy Page, you know, his solo on Whole Lotta Love. I learned that solo when I was like 18 or 19. And at that age, I said to myself, I can play that. But what I learned as I matured as a guy, would I have played that in that spot? And I humbled out. It's not, sure I could play that, but would I have played that right there? Because it was great. So that was a good lesson for me, to put my ego down and say, sure, he played it, you didn't. He's the man.
Mr. 335. Tell me how that nickname came about, and why is it that everyone calls you Mr. 335?
That's great that you don't know that. That's cool. The guitar that I bought and started playing in 1969 when I started getting sessions is a Gibson ES 335. I was the first one to use that guitar, the only one for the first couple of years, and it was on all those hits, and it was on the Crusaders. So everybody in the studio world out there had to get a 335 just as part of their arsenal because that sound was so popular. So I got named over in Japan Mr. 335 because I'm associated with that guitar so much.
And you started 335 Studios as really an escape to start your own recording studio. You don't have to deal with the rat race of dealing with the labels. And then it evolved into 335 Records, where we are right now.
Yeah, it's just my handle, you know, so it's consistent. People know that if I'm going to start a studio, it's probably going to be called Room 335. The label's probably going to be 335 Records. I'm proud to be associated with that guitar.
Of all the years that you've recorded and your solo work, collaborations, and even studio work, name me 3 of the most important Larry Carlton moments that you just look back and say, wow, this is mind-boggling that I even did this.
Mm-hmm. Crusaders, for sure. That would be the first one that comes to mind. One of my first sessions was for Quincy Jones, and that's when he was doing the television score for Fat Albert, Bill Cosby. And I remember going in, I was substitute for someone that couldn't make it that day. I was young, and I remember being so nervous. And the way Quincy would do the score is he would have a score, and there'd be flutes and a trombone and a sax, excuse me. And after we'd do the cue, then he'd say, okay, guitar, play the flute line, flute, lay out. All of a sudden, I got to play the flute line. It was a lot of pressure for a 23-year-old kid, you know. I made it, but I always wondered if I did a good job, and I had the chance to ask Quincy when we were doing Off the Wall. I said, man, remember that date I did for you, blah, blah, blah. I said, I walked out of there scared to death, and he said, I just remember you did a good job. It was that pressure of a young kid, you know, working for Quincy Jones. So that's a memorable one for me. Of course, the Joni Mitchell Court and Spark album. It's a great album. And Steely Dan. Those are the ones that a lot of people associate my sound with.
You know, that had to be another, speaking of Joni Mitchell, because out the gate, this was the first record she had a rhythm section. And you, Tom Scott, you guys kind of were young and very naive at the same time. But this was like a Gothic record.
Yeah, it was 1974. And a lot of us had been playing at the club at the Baked Potato on Tuesday nights, just to jam, just to play. Well, Joni came in, unannounced, and started hearing the players with Tom and John Guerin and Max and me. So she approached Tom and said, I'd like to go in the studio with you guys. And that's how that came about. She discovered us. Mm-hmm.
Larry Carlton, what does jazz music mean to you?
Wow. It's an impossible question to answer, even though you want my personal take on it. It's too broad. Yeah, it's too broad. It's one of those things that you know it when you hear it. Jazz is something you know it when you hear it.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at BB King's here in New York City. I'd like to thank the legendary Larry Carlton for his time, as well as the staff and management here at BB King's. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.